The restaurant was his idea of a power lunch spot. Exposed brick, $18 cocktails, the kind of upscale uptown Dallas place where deals got made over truffle fries and nobody looked twice at anyone else's business. I'd eaten there a dozen times with my husband. That Thursday afternoon, I sat alone at a corner table near the bar, half hidden behind a column of potted snake plants the hostess called a living wall installation. My sparkling water had gone flat. My grilled salmon sat untouched. My husband was 20 feet away, laughing with Sabrina Vance. I knew who she was. Everyone in Dallas financial circles knew Sabrina, wife of Ashton Vance, founder of Vance Capital Partners, one of the most aggressive private equity firms in the Southwest. She was exactly the kind of woman my husband had always claimed he found exhausting. Polished to the point of looking manufactured, never without a Birkin, always performing for the room. And yet there they were. His hand resting over hers on the white tablecloth like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't cry. I think I'd used up my tears the week before when I found the hotel receipt tucked into the pocket of his dry cleaning. Sitting there behind the snake plants, I didn't feel grief. I felt something colder and much more useful. 3 months earlier, my husband had come home with a look on his face I'd only seen once before. The night his business partner had walked out with half their client list. He sat at our kitchen table, loosened his tie, and told me his tech startup was about to go under. "The bank wants a personal guarantee on the bridge loan," he said. $500,000, just to show them we have skin in the game. Once we close the Series A, it dissolves automatically. He'd squeezed my hand. "I just need your signature, babe. It's a formality." I was 32 years old. I was a senior forensic accountant at one of the largest regional CPA firms in Texas. I had a master's degree in financial forensics and 8 years of experience untangling other people's fraudulent books. And I signed that personal guarantee without asking a single follow-up question, because he was my husband and I trusted him completely. I had also, 2 months before that, agreed to a trial separation agreement his attorney had drafted, which he'd told me was just something the bank required to protect both of us in case the company got sued. I'd read it quickly, too quickly, signed it and handed it back without a second thought. I found out the truth on a Tuesday morning when a process server knocked on our front door and handed me a certified copy of our finalized divorce decree. My husband had converted the separation agreement into a full dissolution of marriage and filed it with the Collin County District Court 6 weeks earlier. The court had approved it. It was done. Under the terms I had signed, terms I believed were a financial formality, I waived all claims to marital assets, the house, both cars, our joint investment account, and I was left solely responsible for a $500,000 personal guarantee on a loan I now had serious questions about. I stood on the porch in my work clothes, holding a court document that had ended my marriage without my knowledge, and I didn't make a sound. That was 10 days ago. And now I was watching my ex-husband hold Sabrina Vance's hand at a white tablecloth restaurant, and all I could feel was the particular clear touch when you finally understand exactly what was done to you. "You've seen enough." The voice came from directly beside me, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that doesn't need to raise itself to be heard. I turned. The man standing there was tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, in a charcoal suit that hadn't come off any rack. His face was angular and composed, not the composure of peace, but of long practice. I recognized him immediately. Ashton Vance. I'd seen his photo in the Dallas Business Journal enough times to know the face. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, setting a thin manila folder on the table between us. "Your husband has been using my wife as a cash pipeline for the past 8 months, he said. His tone was flat, as if he were reading a stock summary. She funneled nearly $3 million out of Vance Capital through a series of sham consulting invoices paid to a shell company your husband controls. In exchange, he gave her a 10% equity stake in his startup, the same startup he told you was failing. He paused. It wasn't failing. The bridge loan he needed you to guarantee? That money never went to any bank. It went into an account in his name only. I looked at the folder. Page 3, he said. My hands were steady as I opened it, steadier than I expected. I had spent 8 years looking at fraudulent documents. There was a clinical part of my brain that simply kicked in. Page 3 was a wire transfer record. $500,000, deposited directly into a Truist bank account under my husband's name, 3 days after I signed the guarantee. Stamped. Certified. Dated. The room tilted slightly. I put the page down. He told me the money was for the bank, I said. My voice was quiet. He lied. Ashton Vance said it without softening it, as if cushioning the truth would be an insult to my intelligence. He and Sabrina have been planning this for over a year. She got what she needed, equity and capital. He got what he needed, your divorce, your assets, and a clean exit. And you're left holding a $500,000 personal guarantee on a loan that was never what he claimed it was. I set the folder down and folded my hands on the table. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He studied me for a moment, the look of someone evaluating, not admiring. Because Sabrina is still bleeding from my firm. Our divorce is finalized, but she retains a minority ownership stake that gives her access to certain operational accounts. My head of finance was her appointment. My compliance lead was her appointment. I've spent 4 months trying to get clean books, and I keep finding new holes. He leaned forward slightly. I need someone with your credentials and your very particular motivation to come in and find every single one. You want to hire me. I want to marry you, he said. The words landed with such precision that the restaurant noise, clinking glasses, murmured conversations, seemed to fall away entirely. As long as Sabrina holds any ownership stake, she has standing in certain contractual disputes, he continued. Texas community property law has a long tail. A legal spouse with an executive appointment can override her claims at the operational level. I need a finance executive who cannot be removed by a minority shareholder, and I need the legal structure to make that appointment untouchable. You need access to the financial records that prove what your husband did. I have them. You need your personal guarantee dissolved. I know the bank officer who underwrote that loan. And we'd be strangers who happen to be married. We'd be two professionals with a mutual problem and a shared interest in solving it. He didn't flinch from the framing. If you agree, I can have everything arranged at the county clerk's office by tomorrow morning. I looked over at the other table. My ex-husband was smiling at something Sabrina had just said. The easy, comfortable smile of a man who had won, who was certain of it, who had already moved on and stopped thinking about the wreckage he'd left. I turned back to Ashton Vance. 5 seconds, that's how long I took. One condition, I said, full authority over your finance and compliance departments. No interference, no override. If I find something, I act on it without asking permission. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not surprise, something closer to respect. Done, he said, 8 o'clock. The Tarrant County Civil Courts building. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and left without another word. I wore ivory, not because it was a wedding, but because I refused to show up to the most important professional negotiation of my life, looking like I hadn't slept in 3 days, even though I hadn't. Ashton was already outside the courthouse when I arrived at 7:58. No tie today, white dress shirt, that same unsettling composure. He nodded when he saw me, nodded like I'd shown up to a board meeting on time. The process took 23 minutes. When I signed my name next to his on the marriage certificate, what I felt wasn't nervousness. It was the specific sensation of picking up a tool that fits perfectly in your hand. Outside, Ashton handed me my copy of the certificate. I placed it flat on the hood of his car, a black Range Rover, somehow more real than I'd expected, and took a photo with my phone. Clear, crisp, official seal visible, both our names in black ink against the gleaming paint. I opened my text thread with my ex-husband. His contact name still said Pen. I deleted the heart, sent the photo, and typed, "Thanks for quietly clearing the way. I used the time to get married this morning. Best of luck to you and Sabrina." Ashton was watching me from a few feet away. How long before he responds? 90 seconds, I said, dropping my phone into my bag. He's always been fast when he's panicking. I was off by 30 seconds. The drive to Vance Capital's headquarters in Fort Worth was 40 minutes, and Ashton spent most of it handing me an employment agreement, a corporate ID, and a 2-page organizational chart. My title was Executive Vice President of Finance and Compliance. "The former head of finance was escorted out at 7 this morning," he said, without looking up from his own phone. Her access credentials were revoked before she reached the parking garage. I spent the rest of the drive reading the org chart. Sabrina's fingerprints were everywhere. She'd placed people in accounts payable, vendor management, and 2 spots in compliance. A network built carefully, over years, designed to look like normal corporate structure until you knew what you were looking for. My phone buzzed nonstop for the entire drive. I turned it face down on the seat. Vance Capital occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in downtown Fort Worth. When Ashton walked in with me beside him, the front desk coordinator's professional smile flickered with something she couldn't quite contain. He made the announcement to the finance team himself. Brief, direct, no preamble. Full budget approval authority. All expenditures over $10,000 required my sign-off, effective immediately. Then he left me to work. I found the first anomaly in accounts payable within 4 hours. A vendor called Crestfield Advisory Group, LLC, registered in Wyoming, which is the corporate equivalent of a paper bag with a smiley face on it, had received $1.2 million in strategic consulting payments over the past 14 months. The invoices were formatted correctly. The descriptions were vague enough to mean nothing. Operational analysis, market positioning review, stakeholder alignment services. I pulled the Wyoming Business Registry. Crestfield Advisory Group was registered to a Paul Whitmore. 20 minutes of cross-referencing later. Paul Whitmore was Sabrina's former business partner, 3 shell companies removed. By 9 o'clock that evening, I had a complete cash flow map. Sabrina had routed $2.8 million through Crestfield and 2 other vendors, most of it into an account in her name at a private bank in the Cayman Islands, and threaded through the Crestfield invoices, cross-referenced against my ex-husband's company filings pulled from the Texas Secretary of State database. I found it $220,000 in payments from Crestfield to his LLC, labeled as referral fees. He hadn't just helped her steal, she'd been paying him a cut. The office door opened. Ashton came in carrying 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen down the hall, himself, not through an assistant, and set one on the edge of my desk. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. I turned the monitor toward him. He stood reading for a long moment. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. $2.8 million. So far, I haven't touched the expense reimbursement accounts yet. I took the coffee. It was black, which was how I took it. I hadn't told him that. She built this carefully. She expected it to stay buried because the people who would have found it were her people. "How do we end it?" he asked. "First, we freeze her operational access entirely. I can draft the board resolution tonight. Second, we need a mutual legal assistance request to get the Cayman account records. That takes time through the DOJ, but what doesn't take time is the wire transfer she's been building toward." I pulled up another screen. She's been liquidating personal real estate for 6 weeks. A condo in Austin, a property in Scottsdale. She's preparing a single large transfer out of the country. When she pulls that trigger, the money is effectively gone. I looked at him. "But I know someone who will tell me when she moves." My inside source was a mid-level analyst who had knocked on my office door that first afternoon and told me quietly that she'd been keeping her own notes on things that didn't add up for over a year because she'd been afraid to say anything before. I told her exactly what I needed: any movement on Sabrina's known accounts, any communication about an outgoing international wire. She texted me on a Friday afternoon. "She's at First National Wealth Management on 7th, VIP conference room. I saw the calendar flag before my access got cut." I called Ashton. Then I called my compliance contact at First National, a man I'd worked with on a corporate fraud case 2 years earlier, who I knew understood exactly how suspicious activity reports worked. "I need you to flag an outgoing international wire from an account held by Sabrina Vance," I said. "I'm faxing you documentation showing these funds are subject to an active dispute. Run it through your SAR review process. I just need a 2-hour delay." A pause. "She's a VIP client. The branch manager is going to push hard." "Your SAR protocol doesn't make exceptions for VIP status. You know that better than I do. I'm sending the supporting docs right now." "Send them," he said. "I'll do what I can." I sent everything. Then I sat at my desk and watched the compliance alert dashboard and didn't touch my coffee. 3:10 p.m. The wire transfer appeared in the system. $1.9 million, destination, Cayman Islands, status, flagged for compliance review. 3:20 p.m. status, under review, pending documentation request. 3:28 p.m. My contact texted, "She's demanding to speak to the bank CEO, faces bright red." I texted back, "Let her, the CEO is unavailable." 3:30 p.m. Federal wire cutoff. Status, transfer rejected. Reason, transaction requires additional source of funds documentation per BSA compliance protocol. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Ashton walked in 2 minutes later, read my face, and went to the credenza in the corner. He came back with 2 glasses of bourbon and set one in front of me without asking. "The money?" he said. "Frozen. She can't move it, can't access it. Every financial institution she approaches from here forward will see the compliance flag in the system." I picked up the glass. "She's not going anywhere." He sat down across from me. The building hum was the only sound between us. "You did in 4 days what I couldn't do in 4 months, he said quietly. "You built the structure that let me work," I said. "I just read the books." The federal agents came on a Monday morning. I watched the footage on the lobby security feed from a chair in Ashton's office, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Sabrina was escorted out of her River Crest estate in handcuffs, still in her silk robe, her composure finally and completely gone. My ex-husband's arrest was quieter. He was taken into custody at his uptown apartment on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. He tried to negotiate, offered information about Sabrina's offshore accounts in exchange for leniency. But the U.S. attorney already had what they needed. He got a plea deal anyway, 7 years, reduced from the maximum, with full restitution ordered. The personal guarantee I'd signed was voided by a federal court as part of the fraud recovery. The loan proceeds were seized as criminally derived funds, which dissolved the underlying obligation. I walked out of the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon holding a copy of the court order, and I stood on the steps in the Fort Worth sun and thought, this is what it feels like to have your life handed back to you. 2 months after the arrests, Ashton knocked on my office door at noon and said he was taking me to lunch. Not to discuss anything, just lunch. I said yes, which surprised me. We went to a quiet place near the Trinity River. Nothing like the uptown restaurant where all of this had started. Wooden tables, good tacos, a view of the water. We talked about things that had nothing to do with compliance frameworks or federal indictments. He told me his daughter was starting college in the fall and he didn't quite know what to do with himself once she was gone. I told him about a forensic audit certification I'd been putting off for 2 years because there had always been something more urgent. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I hadn't checked my phone in over an hour. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I walked into his office with a white envelope and set it on his desk. He looked at it, didn't touch it. What is this? Dissolution of marriage petition, I said. Already signed by me. The job is done. The litigation is resolved. Sabrina is facing trial. The fraud has been documented and turned over. There's no operational reason for us to remain married. I kept my voice steady. We made an agreement. I'm honoring it. He picked up the envelope, turned it over in his hands without opening it. I'd like you to stay in the EVP role, he said, regardless of this. That's not what the envelope is about. He put it down on the desk between us. I know, he said. He was quiet for a long moment, not looking at me, looking at the envelope. The firm's Q4 audit starts in 3 weeks. You're the only person in this building who knows where every single piece of this is. Losing you creates a significant operational problem. You can hire another EVP of finance. I could. He looked up then, and something in his face was different, not calculated, just direct in a way he usually kept carefully managed. I don't think I want to. The room was very still. That is the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, I told him. I'm not a romantic man. He stood up, picked up the envelope, and held it out toward me. But I know a bad deal when I see one. And this, he gestured between us with it, is a bad deal for both of us. I had dinner with my daughter last week. She asked me if I was happy. I didn't have an answer for her. But I know that the past 4 months have been the first time in years that I've worked alongside someone I actually trust. Not because I hired them. Not because I had leverage. He set the envelope on the desk. I'm asking you to stay because I don't want to go back to the version of my life that existed before you were in it. I looked at the envelope. I looked at him. I picked up the envelope and tore it down the middle. He didn't smile. He just looked at me with the quiet of a man who has gotten exactly what he wanted and is still slightly stunned that it worked. We went back to our respective offices. He had a board call. I had vendor contracts to review. It was the most ordinary possible ending to the most significant conversation I'd ever had, and somehow that was exactly right. The trial concluded 5 months later. Sabrina was convicted on 6 federal counts of wire fraud and money laundering, forfeiture of all identified assets, 10 years. My ex-husband's plea was finalized, 7 years, full restitution. I sat in the gallery next to Ashton and watched the verdicts read. Sabrina collapsed against the defense table. My ex-husband sat very still, and near the end, he looked once in my direction. His face was a map of every wrong decision he'd ever made. I gave him a slight nod, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that this chapter was closed. Standing on the courthouse steps afterward, Ashton took my hand, briefly, practically, the way he did most things. But he held it. It's over, he said. What goes around, I said. Some weeks after that, late on a Friday evening, I was sitting at my desk reviewing the firm's newly clean quarterly books when a text arrived from a number I didn't recognize. This is Penn. I'm at Seagaville FCI. I know you have no reason to read this. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what I did to you. I think about it every day. I sat with it for a long time. I thought about the woman who had signed a personal guarantee without asking a single question, who had trusted so completely that she'd handed someone the tools of her own destruction. I thought about standing on a porch, holding a divorce decree she didn't know existed. The silence of that morning, the way the ordinary world had kept moving around her like nothing had happened. I typed back, I know, take care of yourself, and I put my phone away, and I picked up the audit report, and I went back to work. Later that evening, Ashton and I ate Thai takeout at the long conference table on the 42nd floor with the Fort Worth lights spread below us. He was reading a prospectus. I was marking up a vendor agreement. We talked maybe 3 times in 2 hours. Once about a contract clause, once about whether the restaurant had changed their recipe, and once about nothing in particular, The way you talk when you're comfortable enough with someone that silence doesn't need to be filled. At some point, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine, briefly, the way you would with someone you'd known for years and intended to keep knowing. I didn't pull away. I thought about what I used to believe happiness meant. Making yourself smaller and smaller until you fit inside someone else's idea of your life, signing things you hadn't read, trusting blindly, and calling it love. I thought about losing everything, and then finding, on the other side of it, something I hadn't known to look for. A partnership between equals, two people who'd been taken apart and rebuilt themselves, and ended up, somehow, sharper and steadier and better for it. The city lights shimmered 42 floors below us, and I kept working, and I was not the person I used to be, and that turned out to be the best thing that had ever happened to me.